Ethan Reynolds had built a life he could be proud of. As a self-made millionaire, he spent his days in meetings and his nights at high-end dinners. He was used to being surrounded by the finest things in life, but there was always something missing, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He had worked hard to get where he was, but as he looked out of the windows of his sleek, black car, he couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that seemed to follow him everywhere. It was a crisp evening, the kind where the city lights reflected off the wet streets, giving everything a soft glow. Ethan was heading out of a luxurious restaurant, his mind still on a business deal that had taken up most of his time. As he walked toward his car, his thoughts were interrupted by a sight that made him stop in his tracks. Sitting on the cold sidewalk, leaning against the brick wall of the building, was a woman holding two young children in her arms. They looked tired, dirty, and cold. The woman was wearing an old, worn-out coat, and the twins were wrapped in layers of mismatched clothing. They all looked like they hadn't had a warm meal in days. But it wasn't just the sight of a homeless family that caught Ethan's attention. There was something about the woman, something familiar in her face. He couldn't place it at first, but as he stood there, staring at her, a sudden jolt of recognition hit him. His heart skipped a beat. The woman, though older and changed by life's hardships, was none other than Emily Carter, the woman who had once meant everything to him. Ethan's mind raced back to the years before his life had changed completely. He remembered the young woman with a bright smile who had been his college sweetheart. They had spent countless hours together, talking about their dreams and plans for the future. He had loved her with all his heart. But then life had pulled them in different directions. He had been offered a job overseas, and although they tried to stay in touch, the distance grew too wide. Eventually, they both moved on with their lives, and he hadn't seen her since. Now here she was, sitting on the sidewalk with her children, a world away from the confident, ambitious woman he had once known. The twins she was holding looked so small and fragile, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder what had happened to bring her to this point. The thought of how things had turned out for her made his heart ache. He stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. He wasn't sure if she would even recognize him. After all, it had been years. But then she looked up. Her tired eyes met his, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to stop. Recognition flickered in her eyes, just as it had in his. Emily's face softened, a look of surprise and disbelief crossing her features. She slowly stood up, adjusting the children in her arms, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, time seemed to freeze for Ethan. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. The woman he had loved, the woman who had once been the center of his world, was now standing before him, struggling to survive on the streets with her children. Without thinking, Ethan stepped forward. "Emily," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Ethan and Emily stood facing each other, the years that had passed between them suddenly feeling like they had never existed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the busy city street continued in the background, but all Ethan could hear was the sound of his own heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe how much time had passed, how much had changed, and how different Emily looked. She was no longer the confident young woman he had fallen in love with. Life had clearly not been kind to her. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, trying to stay strong for the children. "Ethan, I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. "I didn't think you'd even recognize me." Ethan felt a rush of emotions, sadness, regret, and an overwhelming desire to help her. But before he could say anything, the twins, who had been quietly sitting in her lap, shifted restlessly. One of them, a small boy with big brown eyes, reached out for Emily's hand. "Mommy, I'm hungry," he said softly, his voice filled with innocence. The little girl next to him, who looked just like her brother, tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Me too, Mommy." The sight of those two innocent faces hit Ethan harder than anything else. He could see how difficult life had been for Emily. She had the same gentle, caring eyes, but they were now filled with a sadness that only time and hardship could bring. It was clear she had been through so much, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up in this situation. "Are they your children?" Ethan asked, though the question seemed almost unnecessary. The twins looked so much like Emily, but there was something in their eyes that made him feel like they were connected to him in some way. Emily nodded, a tear escaping down her cheek. "Yes, they're mine. Their names are Jack and Lily." She paused for a moment, as though trying to find the words. "It hasn't been easy, Ethan. After my mother passed away, everything just fell apart. I met someone. I thought he was the one, but when I found out I was pregnant with the twins, he left me. I've been doing everything I can to take care of them, but it's hard. I've had to rely on kindness from strangers just to get by." Ethan could see how much she had been through, how much she had sacrificed for her children. It was clear that she had tried her best to keep things together, but life had dealt her one blow after another. He could hear the pain in her voice as she spoke about the man who had abandoned her. The anger and hurt were evident, but there was also a quiet strength that she had somehow managed to hold on to, even through everything. Ethan couldn't just stand there and let her struggle. He had known Emily when she was full of dreams and ambition. She was never someone who would give up easily. Seeing her like this, though, was a wake-up call for him. "I'm so sorry, Emily," he said softly. "I had no idea. You don't deserve this." Emily shook her head, a weak smile on her face. "I never wanted you to know, Ethan. I didn't want to drag you into my mess. You were always meant for bigger things, and I didn't want to hold you back." But Ethan didn't care about any of that anymore. He didn't care about the business deals or the fame he had gained. All he cared about was the woman standing in front of him, the woman who had been a part of his life in ways he couldn't forget. The children she held were his, in a way he hadn't even considered before. "I can't just walk away, Emily," he said, his voice firm. "You and your kids, you need help, and I'm here." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief when Ethan spoke. She blinked a few times, as if she couldn't quite understand what he was saying. "What do you mean, help?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I can't just accept charity, Ethan. I don't want to be a burden to you." Ethan took a step closer to her, feeling an overwhelming need to reassure her. "You're not a burden," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "This isn't about charity, Emily. I want to help you, because you deserve it. You deserve to have a life where you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from or where you'll sleep tonight." The twins had started to play with a small, worn-out toy they had found on the ground. Jack, the little boy, smiled up at Ethan for a moment before returning to his game, but Lily kept staring at him with wide eyes, as if trying to understand who this stranger was. Ethan's heart softened when he saw their innocence. They didn't deserve this life, and neither did Emily. "I don't know what to say," Emily replied, her voice full of emotion. She had never imagined that the man she had once loved, who had moved on to a life of wealth and success, would ever care about her and her children. But here he was, standing before her, offering help. She had always been proud, and asking for help had never come easily. She had tried to manage on her own, but it had only led to more struggles. Ethan could see the conflict in her eyes. He understood her hesitation, but he wasn't going to let her push him away. "You don't have to say anything right now," he told her, "but you don't have to do this alone. I know things have been tough for you, but you don't have to keep fighting every day just to survive. You've been through so much, Emily. Let me help you give your kids the life they deserve." Emily took a deep breath and looked down at her children, who were now both sitting on the ground, playing with what little they had. She could see how much they loved her, how much they depended on her, and how much they needed a better future. For a moment, she felt a pang of guilt. She wanted to provide for them, to give them the best life possible, but it felt impossible with the way things were going. "I don't know if I can just accept your help, Ethan," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "I've been independent for so long. I've always had to rely on myself, and I'd never wanted to depend on anyone else. Ethan reached out and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. I understand, Emily. I really do. But you're not asking for help for yourself. You're asking for your children. And you're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. For a moment, there was silence. Emily was struggling to process everything. She had always been strong, always tried to handle everything on her own. But now, standing here with Ethan, she realized how much she had been carrying all these years. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the endless worry about the future, it had all taken a toll on her. And now, with Ethan offering help, it felt like a small weight was being lifted from her shoulders. Are you sure? She asked softly, her voice almost trembling. Ethan nodded. I'm sure, Emily. You and your kids are family. And family doesn't give up on each other. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had never imagined that this day would come. She had never imagined that Ethan would find her, let alone offer to help her in the way he was. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, things could get better. As the evening passed, Ethan insisted on taking Emily and the twins to his car. He could see how hesitant she was, but he could also tell that she was starting to consider his offer. Emily glanced at the twins, who were still clutching her hands tightly, and then back at Ethan. His calm and reassuring smile made her feel like she could trust him again, something she hadn't felt in a long time. I don't want to cause any trouble, Ethan, she said softly as she slowly walked toward the car. The twins followed, clinging to her side. I never expected anything like this. I didn't want to be a burden. Ethan shook his head, his expression serious. You're not a burden, Emily. I'm just helping you because I care. You don't have to worry about anything. The most important thing is that your kids are safe and taken care of. Emily couldn't help but feel a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. She had always been independent, fiercely protective of her children, and the thought of accepting help from anyone, especially someone like Ethan, felt strange. But deep down, she knew she couldn't continue down the same difficult path. The weight of everything she had been through was beginning to feel too heavy to carry alone. Once they arrived at Ethan's house, she was in awe. The house was grand, beautifully designed, and filled with warmth, a far cry from the cold, empty streets where she had spent so many nights. She hesitated at the door, unsure if she was truly ready to step into this world. Ethan noticed her hesitation and turned to her with a kind smile. Take your time. You don't have to rush into anything. You and the kids are welcome to stay as long as you need. Emily felt a lump in her throat as she stepped inside. The place was quiet, peaceful, and elegant, a sharp contrast to the chaos and struggle she had known for so long. It felt like a dream she never thought she would be a part of. She looked around, taking in the soft lighting, the comfortable furniture, and the clean, inviting atmosphere. It was all so different from the cramped, cold shelters she had stayed in. The twins ran ahead, exploring the large living room with wide eyes, their faces lighting up as they found toys and books scattered around. It was like a world they had never known, a place full of safety and comfort. They giggled as they played, their earlier worries forgotten for the moment. Emily looked at Ethan, feeling overwhelmed by the kindness he had shown her. She wanted to say something, to express her thanks, but words seemed to fall short. How could she ever repay him for everything he was offering? He had no reason to help her. He had a life of his own, a busy schedule, and so much more than she could ever give him in return. Ethan could see the thoughts running through her mind. He smiled warmly. Don't think about it too much. Just focus on your children. This is about giving them a chance to be kids again. They deserve that. For the first time in years, Emily felt a sense of peace. Her kids were laughing, playing freely, and she didn't have to worry about where they would sleep that night. They were safe, and she could finally breathe a little easier. As she watched the twins settle into their new surroundings, Emily realized something important. She wasn't just accepting help, she was accepting a second chance. For herself, for her children, and for the future she had almost given up on. She knew she couldn't let this opportunity pass by. And maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild the life she had once dreamed of. Over the next few days, Emily and the twins settled into Ethan's home. At first, she was unsure, constantly feeling like she didn't belong in this world of luxury and comfort. She had spent so long surviving, fighting to keep a roof over her children's heads, that it was hard to accept this sudden change. Ethan had given her and her children a place to stay, but it felt too good to be true. She spent most of her time helping with the twins, making sure they felt at ease in their new environment. The children, however, quickly adapted. They were excited by the simple pleasures: a warm bed, plenty of food, and toys that were soft and new. Every day they played around the house, their laughter echoing through the rooms, bringing life to the otherwise quiet space. Emily couldn't remember the last time she had heard them laugh like that. Ethan was patient, kind, and always ready to help whenever Emily needed it. He didn't push her to open up or talk about the past right away, but he always made sure she felt comfortable and safe. In the evenings, when the twins were asleep, he would invite her to join him for dinner. They would sit together at the dining table, talking about everything and nothing. Slowly, Emily began to relax, enjoying the simple pleasure of shared meals and conversation. But despite the warmth of the home and Ethan's kindness, Emily couldn't shake the doubts that still lingered. She had been alone for so long, depending only on herself, that it was hard to let someone else in. And as she spent more time with Ethan, old feelings began to surface. Feelings she thought had long disappeared. She remembered the way they used to laugh together, the plans they had made for the future, and how their dreams once seemed so possible. But so much had changed. Emily had been through so much pain and disappointment, and she wasn't sure she could open her heart to anyone again. She wasn't just afraid of being hurt again. She was afraid of getting her hopes up only to be let down. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Ethan turned to her with a serious expression. "Emily, I want you to know that I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for, but I can't ignore how I feel. I've seen the strength you have, even when things seemed impossible. You're an amazing mother, and I can't help but think that maybe we could have a second chance." Emily's heart raced. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of conversation. She had always loved Ethan, but so much had happened. So much had changed. "Ethan, I don't know," she said, her voice shaky. "So much has happened. I've been hurt, and I don't know if I can open my heart to someone again, especially not after everything I've been through. It feels so overwhelming." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand gently. "I understand, Emily. I'm not asking you to forget the past or pretend it didn't happen. I just want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. I can help, and I want to." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she looked at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt. But all she saw was sincerity, love, and a promise of a future that, for the first time in a long while, seemed possible. "I don't know if I'm ready to trust again," she said softly, almost to herself. "But I'm willing to try, for the sake of the kids and for myself. I don't want to keep living in fear." Ethan smiled softly, his thumb gently brushing over her hand. "You don't have to do it alone, Emily. And you don't have to do it all at once. We'll take it one step at a time." That night, as Emily lay in bed, she couldn't help but feel a shift inside her. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she finally felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild her life. Maybe there was still a chance for her children, and for the love she thought she had lost forever. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to adjust to her new life at Ethan's house. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when she still felt like she didn't belong. The comfort and luxury around her were foreign, a world she had never imagined being a part of. But with each passing day, she started to feel a little more at home. The children were thriving. Jack and Lily had made fast friends with the toys and books around the house, their joy filling the rooms. They were finally able to sleep soundly without worrying about where they would wake up the next day. Ethan continued to be a steady presence in their lives. He never rushed Emily or pushed her to make decisions she wasn't ready for. He simply showed up every day, making sure she felt supported. He made her laugh when she needed it, and when the weight of her past became too much, he was there to listen without judgment. It was a kindness she hadn't expected, and slowly it began to heal the wounds she had carried for so long. One afternoon, Emily found herself in the garden, sitting on a bench under a large tree while the twins played nearby. The warm sunlight filtered through the leaves, and for a moment, she allowed herself to relax. It had been a long time since she had felt this peaceful. Her thoughts drifted back to the days when she had been with Ethan before, the love they had shared. She could still remember the way his touch had made her feel safe, the way his smile had always made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. But that was before everything had fallen apart. Now things were different. She was different. Her heart had been broken so many times that it was hard to believe in love again. And yet, as she watched Ethan from across the yard, talking to Jack and Lily with a gentle smile, she felt something stirring inside her. Could she really give him another chance? Could she trust him with her heart once more? Mommy. Lily's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Emily looked up to see her daughter running toward her, her small arms outstretched. Look, Ethan taught me how to climb the tree. Emily smiled as she watched Lily scramble up the low branches of the tree with Ethan's help. Jack was nearby, holding a ball, his face lighting up as he watched his sister. The sight of the two of them playing so freely, so happily, was enough to bring a tear to Emily's eye. It felt like they were finally starting to live the life she had always wanted for them. Ethan walked over to her, noticing the look in her eyes. "They're doing great, aren't they?" he asked, sitting beside her on the bench. "They've got so much energy. It's hard to keep up with them sometimes." Emily chuckled softly. "I don't think I've ever seen them this happy before. They're always smiling now, and it's so much easier to see them enjoy their childhood without wording." Ethan nodded, his voice soft. "They deserve to be happy, Emily. And you do too." Emily turned to look at him, her heart racing. "I'm not sure I'm ready to open up again," she said quietly. "I've been hurt before, and it's hard to trust again, even with you." Ethan's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "I don't expect anything from you, Emily. All I want is to be there for you and the kids. You don't have to make any promises. Just take your time. And when you're ready, we'll figure out what comes next." For the first time in a long time, Emily felt a sense of relief. She didn't have to rush into anything. Ethan wasn't asking for anything in return. He was simply offering his support, his care, and his time. That was something she hadn't realized she needed so desperately until now. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, Emily felt a small but steady hope building inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she could begin to rebuild her life. Maybe there was room in her heart for trust again, for love again. It wasn't going to be easy, but with Ethan by her side, she knew that she didn't have to face it alone. Weeks turned into months, and Emily slowly began to see her life transform. The changes were small at first, waking up without that constant knot of worry in her stomach, seeing her children smiling more often, and feeling a sense of peace she had long forgotten. The twins were thriving, their laughter ringing through the halls of Ethan's house as they explored, played, and discovered new things every day. It was everything Emily had dreamed of for them, and yet it still felt like she was dreaming herself. She had started helping out more around the house, finding small tasks to keep her busy. Ethan had encouraged her to pursue things she loved, things she had put on hold for so long. One day, he even suggested she take a few hours to go out on her own, something she had never done since becoming a mother. Emily had been hesitant at first, but with his gentle push, she found herself walking through a quiet park, the fresh air filling her lungs. It was a strange feeling, being alone with her thoughts again, but it was also freeing. As time went on, Emily found herself talking to Ethan more, not just about the past or the kids, but about herself. Slowly, the walls she had built around her heart began to crack. She started to share memories of her childhood, her dreams, her fears, and her hopes for the future. And with each conversation, the weight of her past seemed to lift just a little more. Ethan listened patiently, never rushing her, always showing her that he was there for her, no matter what. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Emily and Ethan sat together on the porch, watching the kids play in the yard. The sound of their laughter filled the air, and for a moment, Emily felt like everything was perfect. She glanced over at Ethan, who was smiling softly at the scene before them. "I never thought I'd get to this point," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I always thought it was just me and the kids against the world. I never imagined that anyone would want to help us, or that we would ever find a place like this." Ethan turned to her, his eyes gentle but full of emotion. "You've been through so much, Emily. I know it hasn't been easy, but you've made it. And you didn't do it alone. You've built a better life for yourself and your children, and I'm proud of you." Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. She had never imagined that someone like Ethan, someone with so much to offer, would care so deeply for her and her children. It was a feeling she wasn't used to, but it was one that filled her heart with warmth. "I'm not sure I deserve all of this," she said softly, looking away for a moment, unsure of how to say the words. "I've made so many mistakes. I've hurt so many people along the way. I don't know if I'm worthy of all the help you've given me." Ethan gently reached for her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "You don't have to earn love or support, Emily. You're worthy because you're you. You've been through more than anyone should have to go through, and yet you've kept going. That's what makes you strong, and I'm here for you because I believe in you." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and she turned to face him fully. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was burdening anyone by accepting help. It was a new feeling, one she wasn't sure how to handle, but it was also a feeling of hope. Maybe she wasn't broken after all. Maybe she could still rebuild the life she had once dreamed of. "You're right," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Maybe I've been afraid for too long. But I think I'm starting to believe in a future. In a better future. For all of us." Ethan smiled, his eyes warm and filled with understanding. "We'll figure it out together, Emily, one step at a time." As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above them, Emily felt a peace she had never known. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't seem so impossible. She wasn't alone anymore, and with Ethan by her side, she believed that anything was possible. Months passed, and Emily's life continued to improve in ways she had never thought possible. The twins had grown stronger, their smiles brighter, their laughter even more frequent. They were thriving in the stability Ethan had provided, and Emily couldn't help but feel grateful for every small moment. She could finally breathe without the constant fear of the unknown, and her heart, which had once been closed off, was slowly beginning to open again. Ethan had never rushed her. He had always been patient, allowing Emily to take her time and process everything. He understood that healing wasn't something that happened overnight. But as the days went on, Emily found herself growing more comfortable with the idea of trusting again, not just in Ethan, but in the possibility of love, security, and a future she had once thought was out of reach. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, Emily looked at Ethan across the table. The twins were chattering excitedly about their day, their little voices filling the room. For a moment, everything felt so right. Her heart was full, and she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. "I never thought I'd be here," Emily said quietly, her eyes meeting Ethan's. "I never thought I'd find a place where I could feel at home again." Ethan smiled, his expression soft but sincere. "You found it, Emily. This is your home." "And we're your family." Her eyes filled with tears at his words, but these weren't the tears of fear or doubt she had known in the past. These were the tears of relief, of hope, and of a deep gratitude that she couldn't fully put into words. She had been through so much, but here she was, sitting at a table with her children, in a home full of love and support. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could finally move forward. The next day, Emily made a decision. She realized that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And it was time to take control of her own future, to build a life that her children could be proud of, and one that would allow her to finally be happy. She had spent so long focusing on the past and the mistakes she had made, but now she understood that it was time to focus on what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also filled with possibilities. She started looking into ways to get back into work, thinking about what she wanted to do for herself. For so long, her life had been about her children's needs, and while that would always be her priority, she knew she had to take care of herself as well. She wanted to feel fulfilled, to contribute to the world outside of her home. Ethan supported her every step of the way. He encouraged her to pursue her passions and dreams, and for the first time in a long while, Emily began to believe in herself again. She wasn't just a mother. She was a woman with talents, ideas, and a future to create. Over time, Emily and Ethan grew closer, their bond stronger with each passing day. What had started as an act of kindness, helping a struggling single mother, had turned into something much deeper. They shared their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. And in each other, they found a love that was patient, understanding, and true. Years later, Emily looked back on everything that had led her to this point with a deep sense of gratitude. She had found a second chance at life, a second chance at love, and most importantly, a second chance at happiness. Her children had flourished, and so had she. They had come so far from the days when she was living on the streets, wondering where the next meal would come from or where they would sleep. Now they were safe, secure, and loved. And as Emily looked at Ethan, standing beside her, she knew that everything she had gone through had brought her to this moment. She had found the family she had always wanted, and she had found the love she never thought she deserved. Together, they had created a future, one built on hope, kindness, and the belief that no matter what the past had been, the future was always worth fighting for.